Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio, no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast as you're driving along in your car, your truck, or put in those earbuds and listen to it as you're going along in public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the structure of universities all across the Western world and their heavy reliance on international elite fee-paying students and how this has played a major role in altering the entire structure of universities, the purpose of their existence, their mission, their excellence in research and development, and so on. And whether this model of doing business in the higher education sector is sustainable going forward. Now, I'll go back to the beginning, I guess, when this was all breaking out. And I suppose there's a couple of stages to it. One, there was and this happened a little bit later in Australia, and I'll use Australia as the primary example here, but mention others as well. The woke, everybody deserves a degree type attitude to things, equal outcomes. This was far more prevalent in the United States. And in Australia, it came sort of more towards, I guess, the late 1990s. There was a little bit of it beforehand, but it's nowhere near to the extent that it was in the United States. Now, the company I worked for at the time opened up a couple of offices in the United States, one in the Northeast and another one in Texas, and I was playing a part in interviewing new employees to work for the company and so on. And one thing that intrigued me was that somebody could have 2 university degrees and they'd still be functionally illiterate. I'd never come across that sort of thing before. Even up until sort of the late 1970s in Australia, if you completed senior high school, you were regarded as being highly educated. Now, some of this was because it was a merit-based system in order to make it out of junior high school into senior high, because it was a merit-based system. In order to make it out of junior high school into senior high school, you had to meet a certain meritorious standard. So people, on a relative basis at least, people were quite well educated if they completed senior high school. And only a small number of people were going into universities, and this was mainly for STEM courses. You'd have some classical stuff like studying classical Greek or something like that, but outside of that, the sociology department really was pretty small in the overall scheme of things. Not many students were doing that. Now, when leftist governments came into office, they always fancied themselves as the education government and this sort of thing. But what that really means when you analyse it, what it really means is that they'll just gift unearned college degrees and high school diplomas to everybody, and that's what they say is education. Everyone has a certificate. That means they're all educated. And in the United States, particularly in the Northeast, less so in the South, but particularly in the Northeast, it struck me that nearly every minority with impressive sounding college and university qualifications really had been gifted that through affirmative action. That was really my first exposure to full-on affirmative action and seeing it in the United States. Now, there was the first tranche, if you like, of the affirmative action, or the non-meritorious awarding of senior high school diplomas, college degrees, and the like. That first affected local Black and minority type populations already in the US. Now, there wasn't a large Black population in Australia, so the primary beneficiaries of the first tranche of these affirmative action programs at universities were women, or girls graduating from high school to university. So, and the standards were substantially lowered there. Instead of corrupting the exam marks per se, what the Australian education system did was they awarded what they called assessments. And if you came from a minority group, you would be given a very generous assessment. And whichever was the higher mark was what you got. So if the assessment said you got 90%, or assumed that you would get 90% in the test, for example, but you only got 10% in the exam, then it was, I'm simplifying it a bit, but they'd say, okay, you got 90%. So this, of course, heavily favoured minorities that the teachers and the teachers' unions were eager, if not desperate, to promote in order to create equal outcomes. So the idea of equal outcomes, particularly among the trade union, the teachers' union movement, was very much prevalent in Australia, and this transferred itself to university, where, well, boys, straight white boys are getting all the degrees. We need to fix that. That means there's something wrong. So we have to rejig it so all degree outcomes are equal. Now, at around this time, or shortly afterwards, and again within the wider sphere of mass migration and so on, was why don't we get, as in the Australian government or the Australian education system, why don't we get lots of these rich fee-paying students coming from places like India, rich Brahmins, Communist Party goon generals, and they're with monopolies on all sorts of things, and their children. Why don't we get them to come to Australia and or the West generally, and they can pay huge fees for an education which they would see as a social status symbol. It's not that they want a better education. They didn't give a fuck about the education. They want a status symbol, and saying, well, I got a degree in the West. I went over there and conquered the white boys' education system, which is pretty much the attitude a lot of them have. And I came away with a triple PhD. That's again a status symbol consideration. Now, what has happened when masses of students started coming along, the universities then massively increased their administration and massively increased the pay packets of the senior administration of the universities, and then the political parties and also the big business end of town, they wanted positions of patronage to give to their friends and their relatives and their mistresses and so on. So there were no seriously well-paying jobs in university administration back in the day. There were some that had a lot of benefits, such as travel and that sort of thing, but not many people were paid very well. You'd have a job for life, but that was all. And educational excellence was considered very important. Suddenly you had this massive explosion of well-paying jobs. A university president could have their salary, the salary paid to the university president could go up 10 or even 20 plus times. So suddenly they were very well-paid jobs, $1 million a year, $2 million a year. So very well paid. And there are lots of other very well-paid jobs. So there were no well-paid jobs in universities. Now every university had hundreds of seriously well-paying jobs, all that were subject to the political patronage machine. And so this became a great place for political parties and NGOs, these sorts of people to install their friends and again their relatives through patronage and nepotism and all sorts of things. So now all these well-paid jobs were existed. But this, of course, hugely increased the cost of what it took to administer a university. I mean, if you took away all the patronage jobs at a university, and particularly the patronage pitch salaries, which are insane, what are these people? Some of these useless dumb fucks who are supposed to be senior administrators in university getting paid $2 million a year. I mean, give me a fucking break. So all these, if you took away all those well-paying jobs, the cost of administering a university would then start to come back down to sensible levels. But the moment's out of control. So there's this massive out of control cost structure in universities, and due again to university jobs becoming just one sort of morass, a massive miasma of patronage positions, and nobody wants to give that up. The power and the ability to disperse and distribute patronage, well-paid, prestigious sounding jobs. That is an awesome power to have. No politician or captain of industry wants to give up that sort of patronage power, and so the universities are hanging on to it now. But this means that their dependence on overseas fee-paying students, it has, in proportion, has become much greater. They're now almost like a drug addict. They're totally dependent on it. If the fee-paying students dry up, or or even if the numbers decline to any appreciable degree, then the whole patronage machine is in danger of falling to pieces, and they just can't allow that to happen. So there are various ways and lots of anguish and hand wringing and chewing of fingernails about how can we beef up the amount of fee-paying students, or indeed increase the fees. A lot of these people that are coming to study in the West and in Australia, the kids of insanely rich Brahmins in India, or again the Communist Party goons in China. And so if the fees go from $100,000 a year to $150,000 a year, that's still nothing to them. It's just crumbs on the table. So, but that's the thing. Now, I want to now go back even further. I want to go back about 25 years ago, give or take. And I was approached by someone I knew to help out with some financial modeling and strategy development. I'll use those terms just broadly there, for a university, because they were at that stage eyeing off the international market of students. Now, so I actually had some involvement personally at the coalface with the beginning, in Australia at least, with the beginning of this. Now, some of the considerations at the time were look at all the rich fee-paying students going to America. We can have a piece of that action, or Britain. We can have a piece of that action, was the thought. So okay, fine. How many would we need? What would the fees need to be? And where would they come from? India and China and so on. And how would we get that? How would we? This is the people who are tasked with it. They've sort of brought me in as an outsider to help out here, but their view is, well, how do we get it to these? We have to have a sales and marketing office in China, and we have to have roving sales agents, and so I sort of, having quite a bit of international experience, I was able to just contribute a few ideas and thoughts and reports to the whole thing, saying, look, you're going to countries that are insanely corrupt. You can't look sideways or have a shit in these places without having to bribe somebody. So this idea that you can go and offer a value proposition in these corrupt countries and they'll come flocking to your banner, that isn't going to happen. You'll have to bribe a lot of people to make this happen. You'll have to have commission agents that'll be as corrupt and sleazy as fuck, and they're going to go to the people they know. There are networks of corruption. You'll have to bribe and slush fund money into all of those. I didn't use this language, by the way. I'm talking more bluntly now. You'll have to slush fund into all these networks. Once these kids, children of the rich families, come to Australia, don't think they're here to get an education. Far from it. If they've paid the money, they want that fucking degree. This will just be a social status symbol back in India or China. Hey, and I got a PhD in a Western white country, and they spoke very disparagingly, these folks, about Western, white people were just called Western guys, Western places. That was sort of the generic term, and So anyway, I pointed out to them that these people aren't coming. These kids won't be coming for an education. They will be expecting you gift them the degree. They may not even turn up for lectures, or they may not even do they're going to bribe someone else to do the exam. That don't think that any of these people are going to be genuine students. When in India, if there's any talk about an impartial pass or fail exam, the students will riot. This is what we're dealing with here. They're paying the big bucks. They want that bit of paper, and it's nothing more than a social status symbol. You need to understand that education, or rigorous education, or anything like that couldn't be further from their minds. So anyway, the corruption, and these people, I was surprised how naive they were. These people seem to have no idea about what they were doing. Even the people in that group who were putting this together, all of whom were quite well paid, they were all patronage people. None of them really knew what they were doing. None of them understood. They were all like children who discovered Shakespeare for the first time or something. They were sort of, oh wow. They just didn't know what they're doing, didn't know what they were getting into. But I pointed out back then that there was a risk because even at the time they were talking about beefing up the administration, and finally we in the universities are going to be recognised as important people, and we're going to get big salaries and nice big offices. And they were talking more about how big their offices were going to be in the new buildings that would be built that would give them, palatial and luxurious offices, than they were about people who would say accommodation for students, or quality of the lecture halls or theatres, or the facilities. Again, they would talk more about having nice swimming pools and gymnasiums than they would about the educational facilities. So they were just a bunch of amateurs. I mean, seriously, a bunch of amateurs who didn't know what they're doing. They just had connections to the right people, and they were being given. But this is the bit that got me. They didn't seem to have any problem with this bribing and corruption and slush funds. They didn't. Okay, no, fine. All right then. Okay, all right. What's wrong with that? And I did have a problem with it. Well, is that really a path you want to go down? I mean, it's really. So, but they had no, that's fine. And I'm surprised the people who, and when your whole working life you've been nothing but a little flunky existing within a patronage machine, which these people definitely were. They've never achieved, produced, created, or built anything. Then you've got a very different attitude to corruption to other people that maybe have built and created and done things that you don't. You see, bribery and slush funds and corrupt practices. I, for example, take a rather dim view of it. I think it devalues and undermines whatever you're trying to do, and the intrinsic integrity, the value of what you're doing is what its value is. And through patronage and corruption, then you take away that. That's my view, of course. You take away that value. So these corrupt little two-bit flunkies, or I'm corrupt. That's probably wrong. These little patronage, useless flunkies pretending to be big and important, they didn't see there's any problem with corruption. Okay, if we've got to bribe people. And I also indicated things like, if these people are going to get student visas, that's going to be a corrupt practice. It's going to end up being a lot of corruption and kickbacks and payments under the table for that, and the list went on. Again, they had no problem with this. Their objective was to get the big rich fee from India or where else, to get the big rich fee-paying students to come in. Those fee-paying students would in turn fund and facilitate the growth of the patronage machine that these people were so determined to benefit from. And that's really the path it went down, as in my opinion at least. And again, rigorous education couldn't have been further from anybody's mind. But I think this has now become it's a self-imposed stranglehold. The patronage machine must have these fee-paying students in return. For these fee-paying students coming, there is massive corruption and under-the-table payments being made all over Asia and elsewhere, and that these students are being gifted a bit of paper when they've met no rigorous, impartial, independent, rigorous standard to get that degree or that master's or PhD, whatever it might be. But here's something that sort of caught me a bit by surprise. I was having a look at the boards of directors or the boards of administrators, whatever they call themselves, and this is some of the Ivy League universities, or sandstone universities as they're called in Australia, and the board of directors is almost completely made up of the big banking and finance cartels, big international consulting firms and this sort of thing. They seem to hold all the seats. Now, these are the people that are responsible for signing off on and approving this aggressive pushing at woke. This in the African American studies, gender studies, lesbian dance theory, all this sort of. These are the people approving of that, not because they may directly approve or disapprove of that, but it brings more bucks in the door, and that's okay. So, but at the same time, the actual independent, impartial standards in areas of scientific and technical rigor, as to research and development, these sort of things, that's gone by the wayside. Now, every now and again, a university, I think more by accident and design, does come up with a clever bit of research. But then, in order to commercialize that research, that is then handed over again to people, useless, idiotic, moronic people who are just part of the patronage machine, and they utterly destroy it and devalue it and make sure potentially very interesting inventions don't even see the light of day. So I wouldn't, that's deeply concerning to me that all this money is washing through the university system. And we're talking gazillions here, washing through and none of it is coming to any sort of productive purpose. Well, I shouldn't say that. There'll always be some bright kids who'll come through the paper, but the reality is that 85% plus of the students are just affirmative action passengers getting their bit of paper. The international students are just social status symbols seeking flunkies and stooges, apparatchiks, but the people working at the universities are just flunkies out of the patronage machine, and particularly the well-paid jobs. You look at the senior public servants and the senior former politicians and people connected to captains of industry, all this sort of stuff. They're the ones who are all in there pulling the big bucks in the press. I mean, some of these people are spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just on international first-class travel. That's how much a gravy train and a patronage machine this is. So in summary and wrapping up here, the whole university system is a fucking racket, and yet the people, the BlackRocks of the world and so on, are aggressive, brutally pushing affirmative action, ESG, diversity, undermining the very purpose and intention, or supposed intention, of a college university education. You've been a Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.